Hello and welcome to the 5th episode of Cosmic Clinique, where we talk about all things astrological, neuroscience, and everything in life. But it's geared for everybody, but it's also geared especially for minds that are neurodivergent, extra sensitive, extra intuitive, and also, with the intention of supporting those minds to regulate in this very rigid and logical world, which is beautiful, but can work against minds like ours. So I'm Christelle, and today we're going to talk about the lunar nodes and the myth of becoming. But before we begin, I want to say something gently. What I always start my episodes with is that you do not need to understand everything in this episode. As in, don't try and process and digest and divulge too deeply. Just take notes if you want, but you don't have to. And you don't need to get it right. You know, you don't need to get anything right now. You just need to, if you can, just loosen up. Loosen your shoulders, loosen your jaw, relax and enjoy, hopefully, the episode. So when we talk about eclipses, very often they are linked to mythology. And I think it's important to pause and remember that human beings did not always have astronomical explanations for the eclipses that we witness every single maybe 3 to 4 times a year. I was going to say every single day. No, every few months in a year. So back then, in the ancient times, they saw the sky as stable and predictable. And then suddenly in the middle of the day, they would see the light would dim. Or during a full moon, they would see that the moon would begin to darken and turn red. And that was not a small event psychologically. In fact, it was quite terrifying. And one of the things that I kind of associate this with quite easily is that scene in the film Apocalypto, which was directed by Mel Gibson, a great movie, so do watch it if you can. And it's a film that my astrology teacher, Israel Ajose, often references in order to refer or to explain the symbolism of eclipses. So in the film, there is a moment during the conflict when a solar eclipse takes place and the sky starts to darken unexpectedly, and the warriors who were fighting suddenly stop fighting. They cover their eyes, they are clearly afraid, and the violence pauses. Now there is obviously a collective shock in that scene. And what's really powerful about that scene is not whether it is historically precise. It is symbolically accurate, because an eclipse interrupts certainty. It interrupts momentum. It doesn't matter what's happening. And it halts what is happening and forces attention upward. So even the most aggressive or focused action can be destabilized by a sudden removal of light. And that is the psychological impact of eclipses. They interrupt the narrative flow. And I think that is why ancient cultures saw eclipses as omens. They were not just astronomical events, they were disruptions of perceived order. So when the sun disappears during the day, even temporarily, something inside the human nervous system reacts. The sky is not supposed to behave unpredictably. So now, if we move from mythology into astronomy for a moment, eclipses are actually very precise. I love blending mythology and science because it just makes it so real. In that they only occur when the sun moon and earth align near the lunar nose. This is important. Not every new moon is a solar eclipse, and not every full moon is a lunar eclipse. The alignment must occur close to the nodes, because the nodes are literally the crossing points of the moon's orbital path and the sun's apparent path across the sky. Now, on average, we experience between 4 and 6 eclipses in a year. And typically, 4 and 6 eclipses in a year. And typically, there are 2 eclipse seasons per year, each lasting around, let's say, 35 days. So during an eclipse season, there will usually be a solar eclipse and a lunar eclipse, sometimes 2 of one type, depending on the geometry. A solar eclipse always occurs at a new moon. Sometimes we get mixed up with like the new moon solar eclipse being anyways, I get mixed up. But essentially when there's a solar eclipse at a new moon, this is when the moon moves between the sun and the earth and partially or totally obscures the sun's light. Yeah? A lunar eclipse always occurs at a full moon. So this is where the earth moves between the sun and the moon, therefore casting a shadow across the moon. Now, the difference between partial and total eclipses matters symbolically as well as astronomically, in that a total solar eclipse where the sun is completely obscured carries a strong sense of interruption. Yeah, that's a total solar eclipse, extremely powerful. The light disappears fully for a moment when that takes place. Whereas a partial eclipse suggests something is obscured but not entirely removed. There is a dimming rather than darkness. So in astrology, we often reflect this symbolically. A total eclipse tends to coincide with more decisive or unmistakable shifts in our lives. And whereas partial eclipses may correlate with more subtle adjustments or internal realizations. Now, I did say at the beginning of the podcast to not take any notes down, but I would not be surprised if you felt like this was the moment where you might want to rewind and take some notes and really soak that science in. Anyways, the most important factor in personal astrology is not whether the eclipse was visible in your location. It is how close the eclipse degree is to a sensitive point in your natal chart. And this is where precision matters. So in my practice and in the lineage I was trained in, we use tight orbs for eclipses. If an eclipse occurs within 2 degrees of a personal planet, such as Mercury, Venus, Mars, the Sun, the Moon, or at, if it's within 2 degrees of an angle or a significant chart point, it tends to have tangible impact. There is no denying the shift that will take place in your life. Within 1 degree, the impact is often unmistakable. When the eclipse degree is 5 or 6 degrees away, the effect may be in the background. It might be noise just far away from you rather than having a direct activation in your life. So if, for example, a solar eclipse it occurs at 18 degrees of Aries and you have your natal sun at 17 or at 19 degrees of Aries, that eclipse is directly activating your identity axes. If you have your midheaven at 18 degrees of Aries, the midheaven being about career, then very likely your career direction may shift. If you have Venus there, relationships and values may recalibrate. So that's how it tends to work. It is not that something dramatic. It's not that something dramatic must occur externally at the exact moment. I think we need to bear this in mind. It is that the direction begins to change. We may not even see any change take place until a few weeks after the eclipse. Eclipses near personal planets often correlate with endings, beginnings, revelations, or irreversible internal shifts that unfold over the following 6 months. And this is another important point here that I really want to emphasize on. The effect of an eclipse is not confined to the day it happens, okay? The eclipse season is a doorway, but the consequences ripple forward. And in traditional astrology, eclipses were said to carry influence for months, sometimes up to the next eclipse cycle. When an eclipse activates your chart within 2 degrees, you often feel it before you intellectually understand it. There may be some restlessness, some dissatisfaction, or clarity that feels sudden but has been building quietly in the background. And when observing eclipses, for me personally, there was an eclipse that occurred within 1 degree of my natal Venus several years ago. At the time, nothing exploded externally, but internally, my tolerance for a certain relational dynamic shifted almost overnight. I could not return to the previous version of myself in that connection. The relationship itself unfolded gradually afterwards. But the eclipse marked the turning point internally. It was at that moment I could no longer pretend that that there wasn't an issue that had to be resolved and end, So that is what I mean when I say eclipses reveal what is already unstable. They do not manufacture instability. They expose it, literally magnifies it. And this brings us back to mythology. The dragon swallowing the sun is not permanent annihilation. It's a temporary obscuration. It is an interpretation that reveals what cannot continue unchanged. So if we treat eclipses as catastrophic events, we approach them with fear. But if we treat them as checkpoints, we can literally approach them with awareness. And I'd rather be aware than to magnify any of the tension that might be happening in my life during the eclipse season. So that's definitely something to think about. I do not believe in impulsive action during eclipse season. I don't. In fact, I often advise the opposite. Just observe, notice what surfaces, notice what feels different, notice what no longer feels sustainable. And when an eclipse occurs within tight orb of your natal chart, you are being redirected. And that redirection may feel destabilizing because identity is involved. So it's inevitable that it's going to feel unfamiliar and awkward and, not necessarily something that we'd want to go through. But the nodes are always about identity tension. A south node is about familiarity, and the north node is about growth. So the eclipse highlights that axis. It is not uncommon for eclipses near the south node to coincide with endings or release. And it's not uncommon for eclipses near the north node to coincide with new roles or responsibilities emerging. But again, it is rarely theatrical. It is rarely theatrical in the moment. It becomes obvious in hindsight. Yeah? And that perhaps is the most important part of understanding the eclipses, is that they are not designed to scare you. They are designed to move you, awaken you, redirect you. Just like the scene in Apocalypto, the warriors stop when the light disappears. They are forced into stillness. The violence pauses. I mean, that's insane. That's the attention shifts. The attention shifts upwards in that scene. And so eclipses pause momentum in our lives. And essentially, that's what that scene is showing us, is that they force us to reconsider direction. They interrupt automaticity. And interruption is uncomfortable, especially if you're someone who values stability. I don't have Earth in my chart. I don't have any earth in my chart. And the only fixed sign that I have is a Leo moon. Other than that, every planet is an immutable sign, and so thankfully I'm able to adjust and move and flow quite easily. But for some of us who have got a lot of earth or fixed placements, it could be really uncomfortable and really difficult to change. And eclipses, though, create the inevitable and really reinforce that process for you, because change is growth and growth is evolution. So, as you reflect on eclipses in your own life, I would encourage you to look backwards rather than forward. Notice where significant shifts coincide with eclipses near your personal planets within tight degrees. And notice patterns. Log them, journal about them. Because the nodes are not abstract fate. They are cyclical invitations for our souls to recalibrate. And when you understand that, the fear of eclipses, they dissolve. And what remains is awareness. And on that note, my lovely people, thank you for being here. I appreciate you. I will be back next week with a new topic. I don't know about what yet, but hopefully one that will enlighten your soul. I'm Christelle. Have a blessed week. Take care.